Hello again. Welcome back to F#Conf. I'm very happy to have Ody with us today. And Ody has a fantastic story which we are going to talk about today. So Ody, my usual question is, where are you based, and what time do you have there?
Okay, so my name is Ody. I'm a software developer, a .NET developer primarily. I stay in Lagos, Nigeria. I um, work with mainly .NET technology. So yeah, that's where I'm from. That's what I do.
All right. And what time is it right now at your place?
8:35 p.m.
So it's
So
getting late. Yeah.
yeah, it is.
I
It
think
is.
next time we do F#Conf, we'll have to start in Redmond at like 6 a.m. And then, or maybe we should just turn it into 24-hour conference, given the fact that people are joining from all over the world.
Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to ask you a few things, sort of leading up to your current project and your fantastic work on the F# compiler. But let's start by sort of what got you interested in F# and how did you find out about it? What was your first experiences?
Oh, okay. So I first heard about F Sharp. That was in 2013. Yes, 2013. I was listening to .NET Rocks, and I think during that period there was they had one of the they had Yang Kui. I think I don't know. I hope I didn't mispronounce his name, but he was on the show and he was talking about F Sharp, and he was so hyped about it, and it got me thinking, what, like, I wasn't, what was puzzling to me was the fact that he was so excited about this language that I've never heard of, presumably. So, and he said a lot of things in that presentation where he was talking about how, something that would take a Java developer like 1 to 2 weeks, it takes him is it 3 to 4 days or something like that. And that was mind blowing to me because anything that would give me that kind of cost savings in terms of efficiency, in terms of development time and all that has to be like, really, uh, should I say, supernatural. So, however, I started looking at the language as of 2013, and I will tell you, it was like there's something I call it syntax shock. So when so so when I saw the syntax, I was like, oh, what voodoo, what sorcery is this? you
Yeah,
know.
we have lots of syntactic sugar, but this is more like syntactic pepper or something. Syntactic
Yeah,
chili.
yeah, yeah. So so I started initially I was like, this is not for me. I don't think I'm smart enough to take a look at this language. This is just way too abstract for, someone who just wants to write software, pay the bills, that kind of a thing. But as time went on, I got to see some talks, I got to see some presentations from Don Syme himself, from yourself, Tomasz, from even some of the folks at I think it's what's this lady from Jet.com?
Rachel Reese talking
Yes,
with
Rachel
Sonarin, and
Reese.
yeah,
Yes,
we had
yes,
her at the
yes.
last F#Conf.
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool. I think hers was also very impactful because she has this charisma when she's talking about F sharp. So that kind of, spoke to me. I said, let me even take a look at this language. And I started looking at it. It wasn't so easy at first, but as I just kept, because that's the thing, because, I have built my career around like C# specific languages. In fact, I had gotten to a point in my C# career where I understood the language to a very deep level. So it was totally ingrained in the way I thought, in the way I attacked problems, in the way I reasoned about solutions, that I decided to, that it took me a lot of, should I say, unlearning some of my bad habits, or should I say, unlearning some of the things I already knew. But eventually, I was able to finally grasp the language. I got a few books. Okay, so for me, up until this point, studying F sharp was like a hobby, sort of. It wasn't until I think I watched the Pluralsight course from I can't remember his name. Anyway, if I remember, I'll let you know. But there was a Pluralsight course where what he did was he built what is essentially a small compiler, and that just clicked in my head. Like immediately it became clear to me that whoa, this is a big deal. I now get why people are so excited about F sharp, because prior to that in my work, so where I work in a software development firm. We build all kinds of systems, but mainly portals. And there was a particular project that I was a team lead on, and we were supposed to build a kind of rule engine. So essentially, the way teachers want to be able to specify how students will get promoted. So in order to do that, we couldn't build in all the rules for promotion, because in a way promotion was kind of a domain unto itself. So the teachers were like the domain experts. They had heuristics for deciding how to do promotions and all that. So they gave us the job to do, and we were supposed to build this rule engine, and we were supposed to do it in such a way that we could give the teachers the ability to essentially define their own rules without us knowing fully well, or modifying source code and all that. And I remember that was so painful to do in C sharp, because it required essentially building your own subset of the language. And eventually, I know I came up with a clever hack of using expression trees. So I would essentially write the expression when a new requirement came in, when the teacher would say, oh, we want to promote a student if he has at least 60 in mathematics, and he has passed English, and he has passed 6 other subjects, things like that. So we would essentially hand code the link expression, generate an expression tree, and feed the expression tree into the database, so that we could read it. Yeah.
Fun. So that leads nicely to the main thing I wanted to ask about. And
Yes.
it looks like you've been doing stuff with expression trees and with little compilers before, but then you actually got all the way from sort of learning F sharp to contributing to the F sharp compiler. So I'll let you talk a bit more about that, and I'll switch to the screen for that one, right?
Yes,
all
sure.
Right.
So yes, so essentially, we were able to get so we used what do they call it? Expression trees to load the expression trees into the application and run it, and it was so painful to do. So it wasn't until I did the Pluralsight course and then I saw how essentially easy it was writing a compiler in F sharp. So some of the problems that it became clear to me that some of the problems that were really difficult to tackle in C sharp were borderline trivial. And in fact, that's a thing moving forward with the language, was because even when I read Don Syme's book, Expert F sharp, you would see that the examples he gave in the book were like examples that were really difficult things to do in C sharp. And I think that's due to the fact that F sharp as a language is very efficient. So you need to come up with very powerful, difficult problems for you to really show the power of the language. So that said, I think it's important. Let me switch over to the screen and talk about how, Okay.
All good.
Yes. So let's see. This is presentation. This is how to contribute to the F sharp compiler. For starters, I think before you get started, I think the important thing is you need to have some of your environment set up. I don't know if you can see this clearly, but you first need to make sure you have F sharp language support added to your Visual Studio project. So in Visual Studio 2017, when you are installing, you make sure you check F sharp language support. That's important. After that, you just need to add Visual Studio extension development. This is important because this allows you to run what is essentially physics. I'll get to that in a moment. But Visual Studio extension packages. And after that, you clone the repository. After that, you launch the developer command prompt. You can find that, just type cmd here. and run it as administrator, and you're good. So the next thing you'll see is you now need to, oh, let's see, okay, go to the source directory, run the build command. That's this one that you're seeing, this build.cmd vs debug. It takes a while to compile. That's part of the reason I'm showing this in slides, because if I were to actually do it, it would take quite a while. There's a lot that's going on. So after that, you have the you can open it in Visual Studio, and this is the code map of it. So now onto the coding itself. Can you see my screen? Awesome, awesome. So this is, I've opened the Visual F# compiler. As you can see, it has is spread out into folders, is well organized. Here we have the compiler itself. So this is where you have the internals of the compiler, from the IL parsing to, you know, whatever it is. This is the compiler itself. As you can see, it's all written in F#. And this is the FSC. So when you want to compile F# code, you use fsc.exe and put your F# source code. So all this does really is just, it depends on the compiler internals, and it just calls the compiler internals from there. The advantage of this is that you can also add this compiler to your own projects if you wanted to. So if for any reason you want to be able to compile F# code on the fly, you can do that. And this is the F# core library. So if you want to get started with contributing to F#, this is one of the easy ways of getting in. As you can see, it's just an F# project. It has, you know, classes and all kinds of types and everything you need to extend the language here. Then we now have, let me not open this. You now have the tools. So tools include things like the FSI, F# build, and so on and so forth. But if you really want to contribute to the tooling in Visual Studio, that's where this Visual F# comes into play. As you can see, it's broken into several folders. So you have the language service. So this language service is responsible for things like this hover. When you hover over keywords, being able to see things like this, that's handled by the language service. In other words, making sense of the source code, you know, figuring out what are the tokens, the signatures of the tokens and things like that. You have item templates. So when you say add new item in Visual Studio, that whole dialog for, oh, these are the things you want to add, like XML file, text files, source code file, and so on and so forth. So if you want to add new files, you can come and do that here. This is the legacy project system for the previous versions of the project system. That's the ones for previous versions of Visual Studio. So both Visual Studio 2015 and 2013 and so on and so forth. In 2017, the project system was changed, and that's the one we're using right now as we speak. This is for the project template, so console, library, tutorial. If you want to add more like ASP.NET, you're free to do so here. This is for adding test support to the Visual F# tool, so for unit testing and things like that. And these are some utilities, language profiling, then the star of the show. So I just quickly ran through that to get to this. So this is the VSIX. Now VSIX stands for Visual Studio Extension, I guess. So what this does, now this is the main part of what I'm trying to demo now, is what this does. This is like the entry point of developing F#, working with the Visual F# tool. So this will build a version of the F# tools into a VSIX, and now launch a new instance of Visual Studio and load that code inside. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So if I come here, debug, start new instance, you see, okay, so ask me to build a little bit. So while that is building, I'll be explaining, so while that is running, I'll be explaining some of the other things. You have the Visual F# editor. So this is responsible for, this is what gets, this DLL is what gets loaded into this project. It has things from simple code fixes to block comments to navigation to inlining to formatting to classification and things like that. So all the things that you interact with on a day-to-day basis in terms of your usage of F#. If you want to contribute to that, you can easily do that from here as well. While that is building, so things like quick info, navigation, and so on and so forth. Am I missing something? Okay, I think I will stop here for now. Let's just wait a little bit, and it will soon start running. Yes. So as you can see now, this is the really cool part. Now, as you can see, it's currently running, and it's running a new instance of Visual Studio. And okay, this is the memory usage and all of that. But it will build all the components, and now, okay, like I said, load a new instance of Visual Studio and push essentially the source code will be loaded into that instance of Visual Studio. So we could be making edits, making changes, and seeing how it's reflected in the background. So okay, yeah. So this is it launched. As you can see, I don't know if you can see these small icons here. Can you see them?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, cool. So these icons are telling you that this is Visual Studio debugging itself, essentially. So this is some of the WPF tools and stuff like that. But I digress. Let me just get straight to the point. Let me see. I think I need to exit this. Okay. So I can now pick an existing project. So I have a project I've been working on. I can now load that project, and let's just give it a moment. Good. So as you can see, it has some source code. I think the IntelliSense is starting to kick in. You can see this is the project. It's a simple .NET Core Giraffe project. So let's get back to the original Visual Studio. Let me come to source. Let's go to formatting. Let's say brace indenting, editor formatting service. I'll put a breakpoint here, just so that you can see that it will get hit. So if I get back to the code I was working on, why is it not responding? Okay, yes, this is it. Now watch what happens when I maybe delete this. Sorry, my system isn't that powerful. Okay, so if I press enter, good. As you can see, it has hit a breakpoint here. So the reason it's hitting the breakpoint here is because you see every time as you type in, as you make edits to the to your source code, right? It's constantly invoking this editor formatting service, and it's now using that to figure out how many spaces should it give in terms of indenting and all that. So this is essentially the code behind. I can step through it, and stuff like that, you know. So okay, and now it now gives it back focus. So I hope I have not deviated too much. I think I would like to stop here for now. I've been able to show you how to build the Visual F# tools, to run it on your local system, to be able to debug it and you see, F# is built by people like you and myself who are passionate about the language. If you see things that you want to improve in the language, feel free to dive in, feel free to play around with some of the things, and if you have any contributions, send a pull request and they will happily accept them. Thank you.
All right, can we switch back to the video so that
yes,
we can see you as well, and now you can see me too. Cool. I've got the video here. So we still have a couple of minutes. So I had a few questions. One thing I think would be good to say, what was the fix that you implemented for the F# compiler? Because I'm sure people are curious, what kind of fixes can you do to get started, and what's a good strategy?
Okay, so the fix I implemented was with the formatting service. So there was a time Don Syme called for contributions to the F# compiler to allow for formatting F# source code. So every time you use something like Ctrl+KD in Visual Studio, where it formats the source code and things like that. So the fix I applied was taking some of because there was already an existing repository that did that, the Phantomas project. So part of the work was, doing that migration from the Fantomas project to the Visual F# compiler. And one of the, I think it was Vasily Klichenko, I hope I've not missed his name. He was the one that started the initial port. So we were just, making some bug fixes to that project. Yeah.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, contributing to F# is the best way of getting started with F#. I had one more question because I think we mentioned before we're calling you to Lagos, Nigeria. So I was curious, is there more F# users around, or in your company, how is F# spreading? Is F# taking off in Africa?
Yes, actually, there are a lot of, so there's a very healthy .NET ecosystem here, and there are a lot of .NET developers and all that, but I think, so Nigeria is a little bit different from like Western countries. We don't really do open source that much, so it looks as though we don't really have developers here, but we do. We have a lot of developers, just that most of them don't really contribute to open source, and that is changing, but it's changing very slowly. So so that said, yes, there are a lot of F# developers in my company. For example, my team, because I head a team of software developers, and we build all kinds of platforms from e-commerce systems to public-facing applications, and we use F# for some of our projects. So that includes web projects. That includes so some of the web projects we used ASP.NET, regular ASP.NET for them, but mostly what we've been using F# for more and more is in terms of Azure functions. So when we want to like tie several microservices together, we just whip up a F# script, and we're good to go. So that's one of the areas we use F# a lot, and we also use it in testing. We also use it in what's the word now? We also use it in doing like quick tools, because one of the places where F# starts to shine is, say for example, I have a database in a particular schema, and I want to migrate data from this database in this schema to another database in another schema. That's an area where type providers really shine, because it cuts down on the stress of having to code gen the whole thing and write classes and all of that. So we just plug the type provider to one DB, suck out all the data, transform it, and plug it to another DB and push the data there. So all those kind of data transformation are the kind of things we use F# for on a daily basis. And there are quite a few of us. It's just that my role is to try and encourage more of us here to contribute to open source, to be part of the ecosystem, to let our voices be heard and things like that.
Cool. So did you say you have sort of multiple people in your team sort of looking into F#? What were the sort of most convincing arguments for getting people interested? Or did you just say use F#?
No. Actually, in my team, so this is a very good question, because you see, the argument for F# is you have to make it on a case-by-case basis, right? So in my team, we've dealt with massive systems. So we built a testing platform that was supposed to collect, to test, because what happened was we have a governing body that writes tests across all 36 states of the country. And we built a testing platform that allowed students to write exams in all 36 centers, and that gets sent to the server, and everything gets processed on the server. So initially we wrote it in C# and using locks and threads and all of that, and with shared mutable state, and it was just so painful. It was so painful that we ran into lots of problems. So when I was pitching F# to them, I pitched F# to them from the perspective of, these are ways in terms of doing concurrency. If you want to deal with concurrent systems, it makes F# is immutable by default. It has things like agents that allow you to do some kind of actor-based processing and all that. And that was, a convincing argument. That was number one. The second convincing argument was in terms of writing DSLs. So like I told you, we wanted to build a rule engine, and it was so painful to do because writing a compiler in C# isn't exactly trivial. But in F# with things like what they call it, discriminated unions, it makes writing those kind of things very trivial. I think I've seen a talk from Phil Trefford where he wrote a compiler in 24 hours, something like that. So once I was able to pitch that to them, and they figured out, wow, because as a C# developer, writing a compiler is one of those things you stay away from because it's not, the tools won't make it easy for you. But in F#, it's one of the things that's so trivial. So that was one of the reasons why, pushing for F# was quite straightforward.
All right. Well, I think we've got 0 minutes left. So thank you very much for joining us. This was perfect timing. And thank you for contributing to the compiler and sharing your experience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you too.
And if you're watching us live, stay tuned. We'll have another talk starting just in a minute from Gina talking about distributed tracing.